Elena Whitehorse pressed her back against the rough adobe wall, listening to the angry voices outside her small home. The townspeople of Mesquite Creek were arguing again about the cursed girl who lived on their borders. "She brings nothing but bad luck," old Mrs. Henderson was saying. "Ever since her family died, strange things keep happening around here." Elena closed her eyes and tried to block out the familiar words. She was 20 years old now, but the people of Mesquite Creek still saw her as that terrified 8-year-old girl who had watched her entire family die from cholera 12 years ago. Back then, when the sickness had swept through their settlement like wildfire, taking her parents and little brother Tommy within days of each other, the survivors had whispered that death followed her like a dark shadow. They weren't cruel people, not really. They were just scared. Life in the Arizona Territory was hard enough without having someone around who reminded them of their own mortality. So they had made it clear that Elena could stay, but only if she kept to herself on the very edge of town, in the abandoned house where her family had died. Elena had learned to survive on her own. She wove baskets from desert grass and made healing teas from wild plants. The Mexican woman, Rosa, who ran the general store, would trade these items for flour, beans, and other necessities. But Rosa was one of the few people who would even look Elena in the eye. Most others hurried past her little adobe house, crossing themselves and muttering prayers. The desert had become Elena's real teacher. She knew where to find water when the streams ran dry. She could track a rabbit through sand and rocks. She understood which cactus fruits were sweet and which plants could heal cuts and fever. The harsh land had made her strong, but it had also made her terribly lonely. Every morning she would wake hoping that maybe today someone would stop to talk with her, not just trade with her. Maybe today she wouldn't spend the entire day hearing only her own voice. But every evening she would sit outside her door watching the sun set over the desert. With only the coyotes for company, Elena had grown into a beautiful young woman, with long dark hair and eyes the color of desert sage. Her hands were calloused from work, and her skin was bronzed from the sun. She was stronger than most of the women in town, able to carry heavy water jugs and chop wood for her fire. But none of that mattered to the people of Mesquite Creek. To them, she would always be the girl who death had touched and left behind. Sometimes Elena wondered what would have happened if she had tried to leave, to find another town where no one knew her story. But this desert was the only home she remembered. Her family was buried here in the small cemetery behind the old church. She couldn't abandon their graves, even if staying meant living like a ghost among people who feared her. The voices outside grew quieter, and Elena knew the townspeople were moving on. They did this sometimes, gathering near her house to discuss what to do about her, as if she couldn't hear every word. Some wanted her gone completely. Others, like Rosa, argued that she had never actually hurt anyone and should be left alone. These conversations always ended the same way, with everyone agreeing to ignore her as much as possible. Elena opened her wooden door and stepped outside. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, painted gold and red by the setting sun. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from the Apache territories. The native tribes were having their own struggles with the arriving settlers, fighting to keep their ancestral lands. Elena had heard the stories of fierce warriors and terrifying raids, but she had never actually seen an Apache person. They existed in her world only as frightening tales told around campfires. That night, Elena sat by her small fire and worked on a new basket. Her fingers moved automatically through the familiar motions while her mind wandered. She thought about her brother Tommy, who would have been 15 now if he had lived. She wondered what he would have looked like, whether he would have been tall like their father or small like their mother. She imagined conversations they might have had, adventures they could have shared. The loneliness was worst at night. During the day, she could keep busy with her work, with finding food and water, with the 100 small tasks that kept her alive. But when darkness fell and the desert grew quiet, the silence pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. She would talk to herself sometimes just to hear a human voice, even if it was her own. "Tomorrow I'll check the traps," she said aloud to the crackling fire. "Maybe I'll catch something good. And I need to gather more of those yellow flowers Rosa likes for her tea." The fire popped and sent sparks dancing into the black sky. Elena watched them disappear among the stars and made a wish she had made 1,000 times before. She wished for just one person who would see her as something other than a curse. Someone who would sit with her by the fire and share stories. Someone who wouldn't be afraid to be her friend. She had no way of knowing that miles away in the desert, Events were already in motion that would change her life forever. A group of Apache warriors was riding hard through the darkness, fleeing from cavalry soldiers who had attacked their camp. One of them, a young brave named Joaquin Ravenclaw, was badly wounded and falling behind the others. As Elena banked her fire and prepared for sleep, Joaquin was struggling to stay on his horse, 3 arrows buried deep in his back and fever starting to cloud his mind. His companions wanted to help him, but they could hear the soldiers' horses getting closer. If they stopped, they would all be captured or killed. "Go!" Joaquin gasped, swaying dangerously in his saddle. "I'll catch up when I can." But they all knew he was dying. The arrows had gone deep and he was losing too much blood. Still, there was no choice. With heavy hearts, his fellow warriors rode on into the night, hoping against hope that somehow their friend would survive. Joaquin managed to ride for another hour before he finally fell from his horse. He crawled under a mesquite bush near an old creek bed, not far from the settlement of Mesquite Creek. As consciousness faded, he could smell wood smoke on the wind and see a tiny light in the distance. Someone lived nearby, but he was too weak to call for help. His last thought before darkness took him was a prayer to the Great Spirit to let him see his family one more time. The next morning, Elena rose before dawn as always. She needed to check her rabbit snares and refill her water jugs at the creek. The desert was still cool, and the air smelled of sage and creosote. She loved this time of day when the world felt peaceful and full of possibility. She was walking along the creek bed, looking for animal tracks, when she saw something that made her heart skip. There, half hidden under a thorny bush, was a man. For a moment she thought he might be dead, but then she saw his chest rise and fall slightly. Elena approached carefully. She could see immediately that he was Apache. His clothing, his long black hair, the way his skin was painted for war. 3 arrows stuck out of his back and dried blood covered his shirt. He was burning with fever, his face flushed and his breathing shallow. Everything she had ever heard about Apaches flooded through her mind. They were dangerous. They were enemies of all white settlers. They killed without mercy and took scalps as trophies. If anyone from town found out she had discovered this warrior, they would demand she leave him to die. They might even blame her for bringing more bad luck down on them. But as Elena looked at the wounded man's face, she didn't see a terrifying savage. She saw someone who was dying, someone who needed help. His features reminded her somehow of Tommy, her little brother. Maybe it was the way his dark eyelashes curled or the shape of his mouth. Whatever it was, she couldn't just walk away. Elena looked around to make sure no one was watching, then grabbed the unconscious warrior under his arms and began dragging him toward her house. He was heavier than she had expected, all muscle and bone, but desperation gave her strength. She managed to get him inside and onto her small bed, then barred the door and closed the shutters. For the first time in 12 years, Elena was not alone in her house. But instead of feeling happy about it, she was terrified. If this man died, the townspeople would say she had brought death into their midst once again. If he lived, they would say she was a traitor who helped their enemies. Either way, her already difficult life was about to become much more complicated. But Elena had made her choice. She rolled up her sleeves and began the hard work of trying to save a stranger's life, never imagining that this decision would lead to the most incredible adventure of her lonely existence. Elena stared at the unconscious Apache warrior on her bed, her hands shaking as she tried to decide what to do first. The 3 arrows in his back were buried deep, and blood had soaked through his buckskin shirt. His fever was so high that heat seemed to radiate from his body like a fire. She had helped injured animals before, and once she had cleaned a bad cut on Rose's arm, but she had never dealt with anything this serious. If she made a mistake, this man would die. But if she did nothing, he would definitely die. "Okay, Elena," she whispered to herself. "Remember what old Maria taught you before she passed away." Years ago, there had been an elderly Mexican woman named Maria who lived near the settlement. She knew about healing herbs and had shown Elena which plants could stop bleeding and fight infection. Maria had died 3 years back, but her lessons were still clear in Elena's memory. Elena heated water over her fire and gathered her supplies: clean cloth, sharp knives, tweezers, and several types of healing plants she had dried and stored. Her hands steadied as she began to work. First, she had to get those arrows out. The first arrow came out easily. It hadn't gone very deep. But the second one was lodged near his shoulder blade, and the third was dangerously close to his spine. Elena worked slowly and carefully, talking to the unconscious man as she tried to remove the arrow points without causing more damage. "I know this hurts," she said softly, though he couldn't hear her, "but I have to get these out or you'll never heal properly." It took her 2 hours to remove all 3 arrows. By then, both she and her patient were covered in sweat. The warrior had groaned and thrashed a few times, but he never fully woke up. Elena cleaned the wounds thoroughly and packed them with healing herbs, then wrapped his torso in strips of clean cloth. Next came the fever. Elena had seen enough sick people to know that high fever could kill just as surely as any arrow. She spent the rest of the day cooling him down with wet cloths and getting small amounts of herbal tea into his mouth. She barely ate or rested, checking on him every few minutes. That first night was the longest of Elena's life. The warrior's fever spiked so high that he began talking in his sleep, muttering words in Apache that she couldn't understand. Sometimes he seemed to be arguing with someone. Other times he sounded scared or sad. Elena sat beside him, changing his cooling cloths and whispering soothing words in English and the little bit of Spanish she knew. "You're going to be okay," she told him again and again. "I won't let you die. You're safe here." On the second day, the fever broke slightly and Elena was able to get more liquid into him. She made a nutritious broth from wild onions and desert plants, spooning it slowly into his mouth. His breathing became less labored, and some of the terrible heat left his skin. It was on the second night that Elena really looked at her patient's face for the first time. The fever flush had faded, revealing strong cheekbones and a straight nose. His black hair was long and thick, braided with small feathers and beads. There were scars on his chest and arms, old wounds that told stories of battles and hardship. But what struck Elena most was how young he looked. She had been expecting a grizzled, frightening warrior, but this man couldn't be much older than herself. In sleep, with his face relaxed and peaceful, he looked almost gentle. "Who are you?" she wondered aloud. "What happened to you out there?" By the third day, Elena was exhausted. She had barely slept, afraid to leave him alone for more than a few minutes. But his fever had dropped to nearly normal, and his wounds were starting to show signs of healing without infection. She was changing his bandages when his eyes suddenly opened. Elena froze, her hands still on the cloth strips. The warrior's eyes were dark brown, almost black, and very alert. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the lonely white girl and the Apache brave who should have been her enemy. Then he spoke, his voice rough from fever and thirst. "Water," he said in accented English. Elena quickly brought him a cup of cool water, helping him sit up enough to drink. He drained the entire cup, then looked at her again with those intense dark eyes. "You are not Apache," he said, stating the obvious. "No," Elena replied. I found you by the creek. You were badly hurt." The warrior tried to sit up further, then winced as pain shot through his back. Elena gently pushed him back down. "Don't move too much yet," she said. "The arrow wounds are still fresh. You need to rest." He studied her face carefully as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Why did you help me? Your people and mine are not friends." Elena had been asking herself the same question for 3 days. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I just couldn't leave you there to die." The warrior was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "My name is Joaquin Ravenclaw. I owe you my life." "I'm Elena Whitehorse," she replied. "And you don't owe me anything. I'm just glad you're going to be okay." Over the next few days, as Joaquin grew stronger, they talked more. Elena learned that he was indeed young, only 22, and that he was the son of a respected chief. He had been riding with a war party when they were ambushed by cavalry soldiers near the border of Apache territory. "My friends? Did they escape?" Joaquin asked anxiously. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I only found you." Joaquin nodded sadly. He explained that his people were fighting to protect their homeland from settlers who wanted to take their land. Elena told him about her own situation, how she lived alone on the edge of town because the other settlers feared her. "They think I bring bad luck because my family died of sickness," she explained. "They let me stay, but they don't want me around." Joaquin looked at her with surprise and then something that might have been anger. "They cast you out for something that was not your fault? That is not the way of my people. We care for those who suffer." As the days passed, Elena found herself enjoying Joaquin's company more than she had enjoyed anything in years. He was intelligent and funny, with a gentle way of speaking that made her feel comfortable. He told her stories about Apache customs and beliefs, and she shared what she knew about desert plants and survival. "You know much about living off the land," Joaquin observed one afternoon, as Elena showed him how she identified edible roots. "Many Apache women do not know as much as you do." Elena blushed at the compliment. She wasn't used to anyone appreciating her skills. When Joaquin was strong enough to sit up and move around, he began helping Elena with her daily tasks. He was amazed by how hard she worked just to survive, gathering food, making baskets, and maintaining her small home all by herself. "In my village, no woman would have to live alone like this," he said. "The whole tribe would care for her." "That sounds nice," Elena said wistfully. "I've been alone for so long. I sometimes forget what it's like to have other people around." Joaquin watched her face as she said this, and Elena saw something change in his expression. "Elena," he said carefully, "would you like me to tell you about my people? Not just stories, but what life is really like in an Apache village." Elena nodded eagerly. She was hungry for any connection to a different way of living. Joaquin described a world where everyone had a place and purpose, where children were treasured and elders were respected, where no one went hungry if there was food to share. He told her about ceremonies and celebrations, about the close bonds between families, and about how decisions were made for the good of the whole tribe. "It sounds wonderful," Elena said when he finished. "Like a real family." "It is," Joaquin agreed. "And Elena, there is something I must tell you. What you have done for me, saving my life at great risk to yourself, this is not something my people will forget. By our laws and customs, you have earned a place of honor among us." Elena didn't understand what he meant, but something in his tone made her heart beat faster. After 2 weeks, Joaquin was well enough to travel. Elena helped him prepare for his journey back to his people, gathering supplies and checking his wounds one last time. She tried to hide her sadness at losing her first real friend, but Joaquin seemed to sense her feelings. "Elena," he said as he prepared to leave, "I want you to know that you will always be welcome in my father's village, always, and I promise you this, I will tell Chief Standing Bear about the brave white woman who saved an Apache warrior's life without asking for anything in return." "You don't need to do that," Elena protested. "I just did what anyone should do." Joaquin shook his head. "Not anyone would have done what you did. You are special, Elena Whitehorse. You have a warrior's heart in a healer's hands." He mounted his horse, which Elena had been caring for, and which had recovered from its injuries as well. "I will not forget you," he promised, "and I will return." Elena watched him ride away into the desert, disappearing into the heat waves that shimmered above the sand. For the first time in 2 weeks, she was alone again. But somehow the loneliness felt different now. She had proven to herself that she could connect with another person, that she wasn't doomed to live forever as an outcast. She had no idea that 3 weeks later, Joaquin would keep his promise in a way that would change her life forever. She couldn't imagine that her simple act of kindness would set in motion events that would bring 7 of the fiercest Apache warriors to her doorstep, each one hoping to win her hand in marriage. Elena woke before dawn, as she always did, but something felt different about this particular morning. The desert air was unusually still, and even the coyotes seemed quiet. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to check her water supplies when she froze in complete shock. 7 Apache warriors sat in perfect silence in a semicircle outside her small adobe house. They were mounted on beautiful painted horses, each man wearing full war paint and ceremonial dress. Feathers and beads decorated their long black hair, and their weapons gleamed in the early morning light. Elena's heart pounded so hard she was sure they could hear it. Her first instinct was to run back inside and bar the door, but something stopped her. These men weren't acting threatening. They sat completely still, watching her with calm, respectful expressions. It was almost as if they were waiting for permission to speak. Then she recognized one of them. Joaquin Ravenclaw, the warrior she had nursed back to health 3 weeks ago, gave her a small nod of greeting. His presence made her feel slightly less terrified, but she was still confused about why 7 armed Apache warriors had appeared at her home. The eldest of the group, a man with gray streaks in his long hair and scars marking his weathered face, slowly dismounted from his horse. He approached Elena with measured steps, stopping a respectful distance away before speaking. "Elena Whitehorse," he said in careful English. "I am Chief Standing Bear, father of Joaquin Ravenclaw, whom you saved from death. We have come to speak with you about a matter of great importance." Elena found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "What? What do you want from me?" Chief Standing Bear gestured for the other warriors to dismount. As they did, Elena noticed that each man was young, strong, and handsome in his own way. They moved with the fluid grace of experienced fighters, but there was nothing menacing in their behavior. "May we sit and talk?" the chief asked. "What we have to say will take some time." Elena nodded, still too stunned to do much else. The 7 warriors arranged themselves in their semicircle again, this time on the ground. Chief Standing Bear waited until Elena had also seated herself before he began to speak. "My son told me what you did for him," the chief said. "You found him dying and brought him into your home. You fought for his life for many days, asking nothing in return. You risked the anger of your own people to save an Apache warrior." "I just couldn't leave him there," Elena said, finding her courage again. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," said Joaquin, speaking for the first time. "Not anyone would have done this. Most of your people would have left me to die, just as most of my people might have done if they had found an injured white person." Chief Standing Bear nodded approvingly at his son's words, then continued. "Among the Apache, such an act of courage and kindness creates what we call a debt of honor. You have saved the life of a warrior, and according to our ancient laws, this debt can only be repaid in one way." Elena felt a chill of fear run down her spine. "What way is that?" "Through marriage into our tribe," the chief said simply. Elena's mouth fell open. "Marriage? But I mean, I never expected—" "Let me explain," Chief Standing Bear said gently, seeing her distress. "When word spread through our village about what you had done, something remarkable happened. These 6 warriors, in addition to my son Joaquin, came forward to offer themselves as candidates for your hand. Each one believes you would be a worthy addition to our people." Elena looked around the circle of faces, seeing something in their expressions that she had never encountered before. These men were looking at her not with fear or pity, but with genuine interest and respect. "I don't understand," she said. "You don't even know me." "But we do know you," said one of the other warriors, a tall man with particularly impressive muscles. "Joaquin has told us much about you. We know you are brave enough to save an enemy. We know you are skilled in healing and surviving in the desert. We know you have lived alone for many years but have not become bitter or angry." Another warrior, this one with keen, intelligent eyes, spoke up. "We know you work hard and ask little from others. We know you are strong in both body and spirit. These are qualities our people value highly in a woman." Elena felt overwhelmed. After years of being seen as cursed and unwanted, she suddenly had 7 men telling her she was valuable and desirable. It was almost too much to process. "Each of these warriors wishes to court you," Chief Standing Bear continued. "But by our traditions, when multiple men seek the same woman, there must be trials to determine who is most worthy. These trials will test not only their skills as warriors, but their character as men who would be husbands and fathers." "Trials?" Elena asked. "You mean like contests?" 7 trials over 7 days, confirmed the chief. "Each trial will reveal different aspects of their nature. At the end, you will choose which man, if any, you wish to marry." Elena stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away from the circle. Her mind was reeling. Just hours ago, her biggest concern had been whether she had enough cornmeal to last the week. Now she was being asked to choose a husband from among 7 Apache warriors. "What if I don't want to marry anyone?" she asked, turning back to face them. "Then you will not," Chief Standing Bear said firmly. "The choice is entirely yours. But I hope you will at least allow these men to show you who they are. You might be surprised by what you discover." Elena looked at each warrior in turn. Joaquin she already knew, and she felt comfortable with him. But the others were strangers. There was the tall, muscular one who had spoken first. He looked like he could wrestle a bear and win. The keen-eyed one seemed thoughtful and intelligent. There was a quiet man who hadn't spoken at all, and another who kept glancing at the horses as if he'd rather be riding than sitting still. One warrior was so large he reminded her of a mountain, but his face was gentle and kind. The 7th man was compact but moved with the deadly precision of someone who never missed his target. "If I agree to these trials," Elena said slowly, "what happens to the men who don't win? Will they be angry with me?" "No woman should worry about such things, Giro," said the quiet warrior, speaking for the first time. His voice was soft but carried clearly. "If you choose another, we will be happy for both of you. A warrior's honor is not damaged by losing fairly to a better man." "And what about your people?" Elena asked. Will they accept a white woman in their tribe? They will if I say they will, Chief Standing Bear replied with authority. And I do say it. You have proven yourself worthy of our respect. Elena was quiet for several minutes, thinking hard. The truth was, she was desperately lonely. The idea of having not just one person to talk to, but an entire community to belong to, was incredibly appealing. And these men seemed genuinely interested in her as a person, not as some kind of trophy to be won. But there were practical concerns, too. The people in town, she said. They'll be angry if they find out I'm even talking to you, if I actually joined your tribe. They have never treated you with kindness anyway, Joaquin pointed out. Why should their opinions matter to you now? And we would protect you, added the large, gentle-faced warrior. No one would hurt you while you are under Apache protection. Elena looked at their faces again, seeing sincerity and hope in their expressions. These were good men, she realized. They weren't trying to force her into anything. They were offering her a choice she had never dreamed she would have. Tell me about these trials, she said finally. Chief Standing Bear smiled. The first time his stern expression had softened. The first trial is horseback riding across difficult terrain. The second is tracking skills. The third is combat prowess. The fourth is hunting ability. The fifth is storytelling, to show wisdom and the ability to teach children. The sixth is knowledge of healing plants and medicine. The seventh is a test of judgment. Each man must solve a dispute that I will present to them. Those sound like practical skills for survival, Elena observed. They are, agreed the chief. But they will also reveal each man's character. How does he treat his horse? Does he boast about his abilities or let his actions speak? Is he willing to share knowledge or does he keep secrets? Does he think only of winning or does he consider what is best for others? Elena realized that these trials weren't just about finding her a husband. They were about finding her a partner who would complement her strengths and support her through difficulties. There's one more thing, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. If I agree to this, I want the right to add my own test. The warriors exchanged glances. This was apparently not part of their usual tradition. What kind of test? Chief Standing Bear asked, though he didn't sound opposed to the idea. I want to see how each man treats someone who can do nothing for him in return, Elena said. Someone weak or needy. I've been alone and desperate, and I know how much it matters to have someone show you kindness when you have nothing to offer back. The 7 warriors nodded approvingly at this request, and Elena felt a warm surge of hope. These were men who understood the value of compassion. It will be as you wish, Chief Standing Bear said formally. Do you agree to the trials? Elena took a deep breath and looked around the circle one more time. 7 pairs of eyes looked back at her with patience and respect. For the first time in her adult life, she felt truly wanted. Elena barely slept that night. Every few minutes she would sit up in bed and wonder if the whole thing had been a dream. But when dawn broke and she stepped outside, there they were again. 7 Apache warriors waiting patiently for the trials to begin. Chief Standing Bear had brought additional tribal members to witness the competitions and ensure fairness. Elena recognized some faces from Joaquin's descriptions, including several older women who smiled at her warmly and a few children who stared at her with curious eyes. Today we begin, the chief announced. Elena Whitehorse, these are the men who seek your hand. Joaquin Ravenclaw, whom you already know. Thunderwolf, my eldest son and a war leader. Silent Hawk, our finest tracker. Iron Fist, strongest of our warriors. Swift Arrow, who speaks the language of horses. Eagle Eye, whose aim never fails. And Stone Bear, gentlest of our braves. Elena studied each man as he was introduced. Thunderwolf carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. He was handsome and knew it, with elaborate war paint and the finest weapons. Silent Hawk barely acknowledged the introduction. His attention focused on reading tracks in the sand. Iron Fist was built like his name suggested, with arms that looked like they could bend metal. Swift Arrow kept glancing toward the horses, clearly eager to begin. Eagle Eye had the intense gaze of a hunter. And Stone Bear, despite his intimidating name, gave Elena a shy smile that made him seem much younger than his size suggested. The first trial is riding, Chief Standing Bear announced. Each man must guide his horse through the canyon course, over rocks and around obstacles as quickly as possible without injury to himself or his mount. Elena had never seen riding like what followed. These were men who had grown up on horseback, and they moved with their animals as if they were one creature. Thunderwolf went first, thundering through the course with impressive speed and obvious skill. His horse obeyed every command perfectly, and he finished with a time that seemed impossible to beat. Silent Hawk approached the course differently. Instead of rushing, he seemed to have a conversation with his horse first, speaking softly and stroking its neck. When they ran the course, it was like watching a dance. Every movement was smooth and purposeful, and though his time was slightly slower than Thunderwolf's, Elena noticed that his horse wasn't even breathing hard at the end. Iron Fist's approach was to power through every obstacle. His massive weight should have slowed his horse down, but somehow he used his strength to help rather than hinder their progress. Elena watched in amazement as he literally lifted his horse over a fallen log that the others had gone around. Swift Arrow's run was pure poetry. He and his horse moved as one being, flowing over and around obstacles like water. His time was the fastest yet, but more impressive was how effortless he made it look. Elena could see why he was called the Horse Whisperer. Eagle Eye rode with calculated precision. Every step was planned, every movement measured. His horse trusted him completely, taking jumps that seemed impossible because its rider's confidence never wavered. His time was good, though not the fastest. Stone Bear surprised everyone. Despite his size, he was incredibly gentle with his horse, encouraging it through difficult spots with patience and kindness. When his horse stumbled once, Stone Bear immediately slowed down to make sure the animal was uninjured before continuing. His time was the slowest, but Elena found herself admiring his compassion. Finally, Joaquin rode the course. Elena held her breath, wanting him to do well. He was steady and competent, his horse responding well to his commands. He didn't have Thunderwolf's flash or Swift Arrow's natural grace, but he rode with quiet confidence and finished respectably. "The second trial is tracking," the chief announced as they moved to a new location. "Each man must follow the trail I have laid and find the hidden object at its end." Elena watched as each warrior studied the ground, looking for signs that were invisible to her untrained eyes. Thunderwolf moved quickly and confidently, but after 20 minutes he returned empty-handed and clearly frustrated. Silent Hawk, as expected, excelled at this trial. He found the hidden item, a small carved eagle, in half the time it took the others, moving through the landscape like a ghost. Iron Fist relied more on determination than skill, methodically checking every possible hiding spot until he found what he was looking for. Swift Arrow seemed distracted, more interested in the wild horses they glimpsed in the distance than in the tracking exercise. Eagle Eye approached tracking like hunting, moving in careful patterns and checking for subtle signs. He found the object, but it took him longer than expected. Stone Bear was patient and thorough, finding several false trails but not getting discouraged. Joaquin showed solid tracking skills, finding the object through steady, methodical work. The third trial was combat, and Elena felt nervous watching the men fight each other with wooden practice weapons. These were not gentle sparring matches, they were serious tests of skill and strength. Iron Fist dominated this trial as everyone expected. His strength was overwhelming and he defeated each opponent quickly. But Elena noticed that he always helped his defeated opponents up afterward and made sure they weren't injured. Thunderwolf was also impressive, combining skill with natural leadership. Even when he lost to Iron Fist, he fought with honor and accepted defeat gracefully. Silent Hawk fought like his name suggested, using speed and stealth to offset his smaller size. Swift Arrow was competent but seemed to hold back as if he didn't enjoy the violence. Eagle Eye was precise and technical, winning through careful strategy rather than brute force. Stone Bear was the surprise of this trial. Despite his gentle nature, he was incredibly strong and surprisingly quick. He didn't enjoy fighting. Elena could see that, but he was very good at it when necessary. Joaquin held his own against everyone except Iron Fist. He fought intelligently, using his opponent's strengths against them when possible. Elena found herself impressed by his tactical thinking. The fourth trial was hunting, and the men dispersed into the desert to see who could bring back the best game. Elena used this break to talk with some of the Apache women who had come to watch. "What do you think of them?" asked an elderly woman named Grey Dove. "They're all impressive," Elena admitted, "but so different from each other." "That is good," Grey Dove said. "A woman should choose a man whose spirit matches hers, not just the strongest or most skilled." When the hunters returned, Swift Arrow had caught the most game. including a beautiful buck that would feed several families. But Elena was more impressed by Stone Bear, who had caught only one rabbit but had also gathered medicinal plants for the tribe's healers. Joaquin returned with a respectable catch and news of where the others could find more game, putting the tribe's needs ahead of his own success in the trial. The fifth trial was storytelling, meant to show wisdom and the ability to teach children. Each man had to tell a story that would both entertain and educate. Thunderwolf told an exciting tale of a great battle, full of drama and heroic deeds. The children loved it, cheering at all the right moments. Silent Hawk's story was quieter, about learning to read the signs of nature. It was beautiful and thoughtful, though less exciting. Iron Fist surprised everyone with a funny story about a clumsy bear who kept getting into trouble. His gentle humor made the children giggle and showed a side of him Elena hadn't seen before. Swift Arrow told a story about the first horse and how it became man's companion. His obvious love for animals made the tale come alive. Eagle Eye's story was about patience and precision, teaching the importance of thinking before acting. Stone Bear told a sweet story about kindness and how small acts of goodness could change the world. Elena felt tears in her eyes listening to his gentle voice. Joaquin's story was about a lonely person who learned that true strength comes from helping others. Elena suspected he was thinking of her as he told it, and the message resonated deeply with her own experiences. The sixth trial was knowledge of healing plants, something Elena was particularly interested in, since it had been crucial to saving Joaquin's life. Each man had to identify various plants and explain their medicinal uses. Stone Bear excelled at this trial, showing extensive knowledge of healing herbs and their proper preparation. Elena was impressed by his gentle expertise. Joaquin did well too, having learned much from watching Elena treat his wounds. The others showed varying levels of knowledge. Thunderwolf knew the basics but was clearly more interested in warfare than healing. Silent Hawk knew which plants were useful for treating injuries common to scouts and trackers. The trial revealed practical knowledge and, more importantly, showed which men valued the ability to heal and help others. The seventh and final trial was judgment. Chief Standing Bear presented each man with a dispute between tribal members and asked them to propose a solution. The problem was this. Two families were arguing over a water source. Both had legitimate claims and both needed the water desperately. How should the dispute be resolved? Thunderwolf proposed that the stronger family should get the water, since they could defend it better. It was a logical but harsh solution. Silent Hawk suggested the families take turns using the water, which was practical but didn't address the underlying problem. On the eighth day, Elena announced that she wanted to conduct her own test before making her decision. The 7 warriors gathered around her, curious about what she had in mind. "I want to see how each of you treats someone who cannot help you win these trials," she explained. "Someone who is weak or in need." Chief Standing Bear nodded approvingly. "This is wise. A man's true character shows in how he treats those who have no power to reward him." Elena had prepared for this test by speaking with Gray Dove, the elderly Apache woman. Gray Dove's grandson, a boy of about 10 named Little Fox, had been born with a withered arm and walked with a limp. He was bright and cheerful despite his disabilities, but some people ignored him or treated him like a burden. "I want each warrior to spend time with Little Fox today," Elena announced. "Help him with a task he finds difficult because of his arm. I'll be watching, but from a distance." One by one, the warriors took their turns with the boy. Elena positioned herself where she could observe without being obvious about it. Thunderwolf went first. He was clearly uncomfortable with the task, unsure how to talk to a disabled child. He tried to help Little Fox gather firewood, but kept doing all the work himself, instead of finding ways for the boy to contribute. When Little Fox struggled with a heavy branch, Thunderwolf just took it away from him rather than showing him a different approach. His intentions were good, but he treated the boy like he was helpless rather than just different. Silent Hawk was awkward but patient. He didn't talk much, but he showed Little Fox how to use his good arm more effectively and found tasks that played to the boy's strengths. Elena could see that Little Fox enjoyed the quiet warrior's company, even if they didn't say much to each other. Iron Fist surprised Elena by being wonderfully gentle with Little Fox. Despite his intimidating size, he got down on the boy's level and spoke to him as an equal. When Little Fox struggled to carry water, Iron Fist showed him how to balance the pot differently so he could manage it with one arm. He praised the boy's efforts and made him feel capable and strong. Swift Arrow was distracted at first, clearly wanting to be with the horses instead of babysitting. But when Little Fox mentioned that he loved horses but was afraid to ride because of his balance problems, Swift Arrow's whole attitude changed. He spent an hour patiently teaching the boy how to sit properly on a gentle mare, holding him steady until he gained confidence. By the end, Little Fox was riding on his own with a huge smile on his face. Eagle Eye approached the task methodically, as he did everything else. He assessed Little Fox's limitations, and then systematically taught him workarounds for various difficulties. It was practical and helpful, but Elena noticed that he treated the boy more like a problem to be solved than a person to be understood. Stone Bear was natural and wonderful with Little Fox. He talked to him like a friend, asked about his interests, and included him in activities rather than creating special tasks for him. When other children came around, Stone Bear made sure Little Fox was included in their games, subtly helping without making the boy feel different or dependent. Finally, it was Joaquin's turn. Elena watched as he sat down next to Little Fox and simply talked with him for a while, asking about his life, his dreams, his favorite things. When Little Fox mentioned that he wished he could make a bow and arrows like the other boys but couldn't manage it with one good arm, Joaquin didn't immediately offer to help. Instead, he asked Little Fox to show him what he'd already figured out. Elena watched in amazement as Joaquin worked with the boy to modify the bow-making process. Instead of doing it for him, Joaquin helped Little Fox develop techniques that worked with his physical limitations. By the end of their time together, Little Fox had made his first successful arrow and was beaming with pride. "That was very clever, the way you figured out to hold the shaft," Joaquin told him. "You might end up being better at this than boys who have two good arms because you've had to think about it more carefully." Elena felt her heart swell as she watched this interaction. Joaquin had seen Little Fox not as a disabled child to be pitied, but as a person with unique challenges who deserved respect and encouragement. That evening, Elena was preparing to announce her decision when Chief Standing Bear approached her with a troubled expression. "There is something you must know," he said quietly. "Riders have been seen approaching from your town. They are armed and riding fast. I believe they have discovered our presence here and are coming to drive us away." Elena felt her stomach drop. She had been so caught up in the trials that she hadn't considered how the townspeople of Mesquite Creek would react if they discovered Apache warriors camped so close to their settlement. "How many riders?" she asked. "Perhaps 15 or 20, the chief replied. "They will be here within the hour." Elena's mind raced. She thought of Rosa at the general store, who had always been kind to her, and even some of the other townspeople who weren't really bad, just frightened. If there was a fight between the Apache warriors and the settlers, people on both sides would die. "Chief Standing Bear," she said suddenly. "What if there was another way to handle this? What if instead of fighting or running away, we tried to talk to them?" The older man looked skeptical. "Your people do not have a history of listening to Apache words." "But they know me," Elena said. "I've lived here for 12 years. If I spoke for you, if I explained what was really happening here." Thunderwolf, who had been listening, shook his head. "Elena, they cast you out long ago. Why would they listen to you now?" "Maybe they won't," Elena admitted. "But maybe some of them will. And if we can prevent bloodshed, isn't it worth trying?" She looked around at the 7 warriors who had competed for her hand, and at the other Apache people who had come to witness the trials. These weren't savage enemies. They were families, people with children and grandparents, hopes and fears just like anyone else. "I know what I want to do," Elena announced. "I want to stand between our two peoples and try to build a bridge instead of a battlefield." An hour later, Elena stood in the open space between the Apache camp and the approaching riders from Mesquite Creek. She was alone, having convinced both sides to let her try to mediate before any weapons were drawn. The townspeople rode up in a cloud of dust, led by the sheriff and several men Elena recognized. They looked frightened and angry, exactly as she had expected. "Elena Whitehorse," the sheriff called out, "step away from those savages. We're here to rescue you." I don't need rescuing, Elena called back, her voice carrying clearly across the desert air. These people are here in peace. They've done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong? Sputtered Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's husband. They're Apache. They're killers and raiders. Some Apache have fought against settlers, Elena agreed, just as some settlers have killed Apache people. But these particular people have harmed no one. They came here to honor me for saving the life of one of their warriors. She went on to tell the story of finding Joaquin wounded and nursing him back to health. She explained about the trials and what they had meant to her. Most importantly, she talked about what she had learned about the Apache people, their sense of family, their loyalty, their code of honor. They're not monsters, she said passionately. They're human beings trying to protect their families and their way of life, just like you are. Not everyone was convinced. Some of the townspeople remained hostile and suspicious. But Elena noticed that a few faces had softened as she spoke. Rosa, the shopkeeper, was nodding slightly. Even the sheriff looked less certain than when he had arrived. What are you asking us to do? Rosa called out. I'm asking you to give peace a chance, Elena replied. These people don't want to fight you. They want to live on their ancestral lands and raise their children in safety. If we could find a way to coexist instead of constantly being at war. Chief Standing Bear stepped forward, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. I would like to speak, he said in careful English. The settlers tensed, hands moving toward weapons, but Elena held up her hand. Please, just listen. The Apache chief spoke with dignity and wisdom, talking about his people's desire for peace, their willingness to share the land, and their respect for Elena's courage and compassion. He didn't promise that all conflicts could be ended. There were warriors on both sides who preferred fighting to talking, but he offered to work toward understanding between their peoples. The conversation that followed wasn't easy. There was anger and suspicion on both sides, old grievances and fresh fears. But gradually, Elena began to see something she had never expected. Actual communication between Apache and settler representatives. They didn't solve all their problems that day, but they agreed to try a period of non-aggression, with Elena serving as a go-between when issues arose. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a beginning. As the sun set and the townspeople prepared to ride back to Mesquite Creek, Elena realized it was time to make her own decision. The trials were over, her test was complete, and she had seen into the hearts of 7 good men. She gathered the warriors around her one final time. You are all honorable men, she began. Each of you has shown me different kinds of strength and wisdom. Any woman would be fortunate to have any of you as a husband.